All right, folks. So good evening. You've got another segment of Court Matters with Sandy and Wendy, media extraordinaire personalities, I guess, is how we might describe ourselves in our own head. But we're going to be talking about, as you know, with this segment, you saw our introductory, hopefully you saw our introductory show. If you didn't, by all means, go to the website, cmrtv.com. Click on the link that says Court Matters. You can do that for every single show that's on there, and you can see, all the different episodes. So this is episode number 2, but really and truly our first proper episode as we start to dive into some of the areas. So Wendy, we thought we would tackle bail, which is kind of a big topic, actually. It's bigger than people realize. Mm-hmm. But how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, and it's great to be with you again, Sandra, and your CMR listeners.
Yes.
This is a big subject, as you said. We've got a lot to talk about, and there's some, a few controversies maybe here and there, possible.
Right. All right.
Not so much
let's
comedy,
start
more
with the
controversy.
Yes, I think we should always start with a definition. I find that a lot of people may hear these concepts and they're like, I don't really know, what that means. So of course, the thing that I always say, and this is what they teach you in law school, if you want to understand a definition, you actually need to go to the law and have a look at it. So we do have a copy of the bail's law here, and we're going to be referring to it during this evening's segment from time to time. But in a common law way, without even looking at the law first, Wendy, what do you think bail is? How would you describe it?
Yeah, obviously, when someone's arrested and then charged with an offence, they're either kept in jail or they're not. And if they're not, then they're on bail. And I think it was when we were discussing the idea of this show, you were the one that said to me, people don't realise that there is a presumption of bail, because that's the point. Every single person, no matter if you're charged with a crime, you might be charged with a very, very serious crime, but you are innocent until proven guilty. So taking away your freedom is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a last resort. So just to make sure that we understand, when I said that there's a presumption in favor of bail, we're going to talk about exactly what that means and kind of where that presumption comes from, because there's a long history of it. It means that really when someone goes to court, there's the assumption it's in their favor that they're going to get bail. And there has to be a really, really substantial reason or reasons why they wouldn't get bail. So just a basic definition, bail is basically the conditional or unconditional release of someone who has been arrested pending a further hearing or trial. And it's a key practice where, again, it's meant to protect the presumption of innocence and individual liberty.
Yeah,
so that's where the presumption of bail comes from, because there is a presumption of innocence, which when we get to, that particular show, we'll talk about exactly what presumption of innocence means. But in the most basic sense of understanding of the concept, you are thought to be innocent until proven otherwise. So the burden isn't on the defense or the defendant. The burden is on the prosecution. So because the burden is on the prosecution, that also means that even when it comes to bail, instead of them keeping you in jail pending, a trial, the court says, or the law basically says, no, there is an actual presumption of bail that exists. And that is the general rule. So we have the presumption coming from the UK legislation. Of course, this is a common law jurisdiction. What does common law jurisdiction mean, Wendy? We're going to throw some.
That's above my pay grade in terms of what it really means. But it's just that it's a term that's been referred to for years of the countries that share a certain type of law, and it's all of the Commonwealth countries basically, or former Commonwealth countries, and it's like it means that effectively it's what enables. It's what makes it easier for everybody to practice in everybody else's jurisdiction. So Australians and Brits and Canadians can all practice pretty much in the same, because although there's nuances of difference in their jurisdictions, they're effectively very, very similar. Unlike the United States, which despite once being a British colony many years ago, it's completely different, and it's created its own, way of doing things. And I think in America, the situation over there when it comes to bail is just absolutely awful. I mean, it's just yet another, capitalist pig dog attempt to make money out of people, even when they're on their knees and at their worst time in their lives. And which is why here you'll find it very, very, people don't get asked here for $1 million bail. I mean, it just doesn't happen. You either get bail or you don't. And if you're not going to get bail, then they're not going to say, well, okay, you could still have it if you give us $500,000. That's not going to happen in a common law jurisdiction. That's the point. I mean, I think interestingly enough, I think the most common bond here for people who have to give money to the courts is $900. And effectively, most of the time, you don't even have to give the $900. You can just give a surety on it, or you can give it. Bail can even be on your own reconnaissance, and you will be charged $900 if you fail to show up. But there are, of course, as we were saying in the introduction show, there are lots of prejudices in that, and that's in all of these things, and that's where the issues come in for the common man in the street to understand. Why is my relative banged up because they've been accused and charged with something that they're perfectly innocent of as far as the family's concerned? And yet there's a guy that they know has stolen $1 million, but he's a big hotshot lawyer, and he's riding around in his Ferrari still, and no sign of jail for him. Whereas their nephew or whatever is sitting rotting away in Northwood, waiting endlessly for a trial. Although of course. There are issues about anybody who's on remand waiting a trial, that it must be speedier. So another issue about anybody that's coming to court, when you're on bail, the likelihood of you getting an earlier trial is less so, because the earlier trials that are available are going to go to those who are on remand.
Yes, very true. So let me just clarify one thing with the sort of the common law jurisdiction, right? So basically the common law is where the primary source of the law are actual judicial decisions. So those are cases, case law, and precedents, as opposed to something that's actually written down in statute or codified in some way, right? So a lot of written codes dominate the
ball of stuff that goes around it.
Yeah, so it's that's where the common law kind of comes into play. And so these court decisions, that's why, Wendy, a lot of these court decisions are really, really important, because oftentimes, especially if it's a grand court matter, even a higher court, they're actually looking at decisions, not just in this jurisdiction, but obviously the UK. We would look to them to say, has the UK decided on this? If there are any human rights related considerations, we're going to look at the ECHR. We might look at other Commonwealth jurisdictions as well, including, as you said, Australia, New Zealand. Where else?
Canada,
yes.
Jamaica.
Yeah, not so much so, but UK being, if we've got a UK precedent setting case, we normally wouldn't really even look beyond that. But so very, very interesting that the common law is kind of in a lot of different, even the US has their own common law. It's just that it's not related to us, really. We wouldn't look
it's just
so much there.
We have there's a lot of closeness with the way that we do things here across the Commonwealth, obviously for obvious reasons, because the Brits were the ones that sort of brought their way of doing things and imposed it on everybody else. So, and it's lingered. There are sort of elements of the process, as you say, the common law, the process of it is similar, but everywhere's nuanced, and here is nuanced as well. And we here in the Cayman Islands, we're dealing with issues that not all countries deal with quite so commonly as we deal with, which is so many of our people are not from here. They don't all have ties to the community. So somebody who gets charged here with a relatively serious offense, their likelihood of absconding from bail when you can't demonstrate a tight reason for staying in Cayman is much greater. Now, obviously, it's easier to stop them because you can't leave the Cayman Islands jurisdiction without going through a physical airport or a physical port. But people do, and I mean that's what happens is quite often people who are on bail here, because of the issues of medical necessity, and you can't get the medical attention you need here, it's it's very difficult for courts to refuse people to go overseas to get the medical treatment that they need, because that is, especially when they're still innocent people, obviously undermines their human rights. And so consequently, we have a lot of circumstances, and it's happened a lot. And I know you've seen it too when you've gone and covered court, the amount of people that actually abscond after they've been allowed to go away for medical treatment or to visit family that are ill or sick or something, and they never come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll talk about maybe a few of those that have really, taken off over the years. But yeah, so this presumption in bail is a pretty strong presumption. And so, folks, again, what that means is that, ultimately you go to court, the chances of you getting bail are pretty good in terms of being in your favor. And, unless there's something, because they put a lot of things in place, Wendy. I mean, you and I know this, that will ensure that a person is as compliant as possible. So everything, if they've got to put an ankle bracelet on you, if they have to restrict your movements in terms of you can only, go to work, and after work you go straight nowhere else.
There's an awful lot of conditions attached to, depending on the crime, there'll be conditions that are appropriate for that crime. And as you say, if it, a repeat offender might be inclined, they might get a tag. I mean, I feel, as is with everything in this country right now, our infrastructure is under such incredible pressure from the growing population, which means, we are the pool of criminality is growing. Consequently, the number of people coming to court is growing, and the number of people that need tags is growing. And we're not necessarily keeping up with the resources for these things. And so you have these situations where people are waiting for tags so they can be put on bail. So quite often people are sitting on remand when they could actually get bail because they can't get a tag. Or,
that's so crazy.
And also there are other issues as well that go into where we always talk about where the inequities in justice always lie for people that are not comfortable or are not well off. For example, if you're homeless or you're living in a place where they can't set up the connection for the electronic tag, you're not going to get bail. There are issues like that. So these things have got to be given consideration, because they continue to sort of chip away at the fairness and equity of the criminal justice system. Because if I can't get bail just because I'm poor, I'm just as innocent as anyone else, but I can't get bail because they've decided that the case is so serious, and maybe I've done something bad in the past. I need to have a tag on in order to be bailed. And if I was a millionaire living in a comfortable house, then that would be without question, I would get it. But because I don't have money, I'm living from house to house, I don't have a steady address, I'm really unlikely to get bail. And this is where you start to see that in, the spiraling of, poverty, of how it can make things so much worse for people when it's just simply not fair.
Yep, absolutely. And these are some of the nuances, I think, that a lot of times people don't think about or may not even be aware of at all. So that's what part of this show hopefully will do, is make people think a little bit like, okay, this person has gotten bail. And I find a lot of people are actually shocked and surprised, like, oh my God, this person who's accused of this horrible crime has gotten bail. Even sometimes for offenses, involving gun violence and stuff, they still get bail.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're charged, I mean, this is the thing, you're charged, you're not convicted.
Right.
So you're innocent. So why should your freedom be taken away? And this is part of the problem. I mean, we see it on Cayman News Service all the time in the comments on our criminal stories in particular. The phrase constantly comes up, oh, here we go again with the RCIPS stroke court catch and release program, which in other words is and then you have that, obviously there's the revolving door of recidivism, but there's also people also see it that if you're suspected of a series of burglaries, say, and the community sees you as a pest, but you're not proven yet to have done those burglaries. And if you don't have a criminal record, if you have somewhere stable to stay, if you have if you have access to electronic tag, if you can give a small surety or a bond, if you can adhere to a curfew, then they are not going to put you in jail. Because the other side of that coin, when I'm talking about infrastructure challenges, our jailhouse is full.
Right. Yep.
And we need the jailhouse so the people that actually have been convicted, and especially people who have been convicted of violent crimes and who need to be separated from society. You know, I mean, I have all sorts of feelings about if you don't commit a violent crime or a sexual crime, then I think, you know, jail is not always the right place. And again, you know, I think we're going to do another show about that as well. People don't realize that jail should also be a last resort. And I think, you know, that the point about remand is that we're getting ourselves into a situation here where it is becoming a challenge for the criminal justice system here because of the prison is full. And we don't necessarily have the monitoring and the systems or as many of the resources that we need to monitor people in the community as well as we could, because modern technology should allow us to monitor people, everybody on remand. If you're not convicted yet, then everyone should be on remand, and we should have the technology to enable that. But given the rapid pace of increasing population, increasing criminality, we have the problem of we're not keeping pace. And it's not. I'm not blaming government for that, because how can they? I mean, when you're talking about our population pretty much increasing by somewhere in the region of about 40 adult population of around 40% since COVID, how can you possibly keep a pace with that kind of increase in population?
Yep.
And it affects absolutely every element of our lives, and it is affecting population growth, is affecting the criminal justice system.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. I wonder do we have any indication of how many of the monitors they do have?
No, actually, that's a very good question. We should at some point ask. It's 911 that looks after it. But at any given time, I mean, there are literally, I would estimate, somewhere in the over 100 people on remand at any given time. So they must have some, you know, that kind of number, but they obviously need more.
Right. Yeah. All right. So what is the most unusual case that you've seen when it comes to bail? Like, what case did you go, oh, this person's not going to get bail, and then they end up getting it?
Oh, actually, that doesn't happen very often, because I think you can usually be quite predictable about bail in that, as we've said earlier, people do tend to get bail here, unless the only times they don't, where you're pretty sure they're not going to, is when they're charged with murder. And the arguments that the prosecutors will always make in the courts when somebody's charged with murder is generally that it's such a serious offence, and they're looking at a life sentence, that if they're on remand, the temptation to abscond is very high, even if you have ties to the community.
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes you'll see that people who are on that cusp, where you're in that situation where the charges are always, it always seems when there's a death, people are usually charged with murder, and then sometimes that can be shifted down to manslaughter. And in those cases, sometimes you might find that when the charge drops to manslaughter, that they get bail.
Yep. Okay.
But I think the bail situation, and where the sort of, where people get a little aggravated by it, is this issue where people who are from overseas, people who don't have ties to the community, get bail and then they abscond. And I think we've had some pretty insidious cases. And I would say, when you say about not so much the most usual circumstances, some of the most egregious ones have been those types. And I think, I think you'll probably agree with me. I don't know whether we're naming names, but we had an incident where a BRAC, a property owner in the BRAC, who was from the United States, basically imported a whole load of weaponry into the Cayman Islands, knowing full well it was against the law, but because he was an American citizen and all these guns were his guns and they were legal and some were on his boat, and he just effectively put them in a container and brought them to the BRAC without all the proper. I mean, the irony is, of course, that he probably might have been allowed to import them. You know what I mean? Had he done it, had he made the application, but he didn't. He just brought them, and then when he got caught, there was all hell to pay, and he was one of the people that absconded. He was, eventually he was given bail and he was given permission to travel because he was sick, And then he never came back.
Well, first he was given permission to travel because he had to go check on a property during a storm. And then he was given permission again because of some family illness or something that he probably just made up.
And I think he himself did get ill. I think there was some evidence that he himself was actually ill as well towards the end, because the case dragged on for a long time. But we, you know, it's not uncommon that we hear of. I mean, there's been, I think there was a case with a guy that was working behind the bar at Rackham's. He absconded. He was done for theft and he disappeared because, again, the same reasons. So, you know, here, and then of course we also have the situation where, you know, people from our neighboring islands can sometimes just hop on a sort of, you know, unofficial boat, you know, them canoe ones with the big engines on, and go home. You know, that happens too.
Absolutely. And it has happened because, you know,
frequently
independents have gone missing. So let's talk a little bit about security. So there is a concept that you can be sort of released on your own recognizance, which is like basically who's like, all right, it's more low level offenses. They don't think that you're a flight risk. So in that case, they're not going to take your passport. They don't normally put any conditions on you. You can, in fact, travel, you know, back and forth while your matter.
Those are very minor cases generally. What you'd get that would happen in summary court. In Grand Court, less. In Grand Court these days, they're almost always asking for passports.
You know, I've never, for all of my cases, I've never had to do anything other than, you know, just show up to court, I suppose. Not contact any witnesses, maybe. I can't remember.
The kind of things that you've been charged with, I mean, you're not a threat to the community as much as the police might think you are. You're not, you know what I mean? You're not a threat. You're just, you know, you've been accused of doing things that are not, they're very specific things about very specific issues. They're not things that would cause you to be, most of them don't carry any massive jail sentences. And where are you going to go? Everybody know who you are. I mean, where are you going to go, Sandra?
I know.
You're not going to get like one little toe near the airport before somebody calls you out.
I know. But you know what's interesting? I'm going to use
I
myself.
I can't see you getting on a Jamaican canoe. I just can't see it.
I'm going to use myself. I'm going to use myself as an example now when it does come to potentially breaching a bail condition, because I was accused of that in that Matthew Leslie case. It was kind of interesting. So one of the things with my bail condition in that case, it was something like I couldn't publish anything more, I guess, about him while the matter was ongoing, sort of thing. And so the prosecution had gotten something wrong, and they sent my lawyer correspondence basically saying, okay, we got this wrong, and we basically want to try to fix this and whatever. And I shared that document. And so when I shared that document, Darlene Oku ran into the court and basically tried to make this argument before one of the justices. I can't remember his name now. It wasn't the one who heard it in the end, but another one, where she claimed that I had basically gone against my bail conditions. And
reached your bail conditions.
Reached my bail conditions, right. And so she was demanding that I actually be put in jail. And the judge was like, what? He's like, no. He's like, first of all, it's not a breach.
What did you do to that woman?
Listen,
she really had it in for you.
She really did. She really, really did. I think I called her an old cat lady or something. Maybe she was up in her feelings. I don't know. But, you know, it was pretty weird because I was sitting there going, are you serious right now?
Nice.
But yeah, she claimed that, you know, I should have my bail conditions revoked as a result of that. And the judge said, nah, that's ridiculous. He said, first of all, this is correspondence between her and her attorney. Yes, it came from your office, but it's directed at her. And if she wants to share a letter that someone has sent to her, that's her business. Like, that's not, you know, that's kind of weird.
It's not the same as you doing another show on Mr. Leslie or something, is it? You know?
No, for sure. So it was just, it was extremely, extremely bizarre. Now some people contact me all the time and say, you know, this person's supposed to be in bail, but I see them like doing stuff that I can't imagine is part of the bail conditions. So let's talk about what some of the conditions typically are.
Oh, they obviously they're very on the crime, but sometimes in fact, often there's curfews, and the curfews usually wrap around someone's job. So they'll give them like an hour or so travel time on either side. Sometimes they're not to go anywhere near a licensed premises. That's can be quite common, especially in violent cases where there's been fights. You know, if somebody's charged with wounding with intent or something like that, and they, you know, it's as a result of a bar fight in particular, you'll find that they're not supposed to go near licensed premises, so either shops or bars. That's pretty common. As I say, the curfews are pretty common. The passport being taken away, even where they are Kimanians. I mean, there are some cases where the perp doesn't even, or the suspect may not even have a passport, so that's not an issue. They don't mind if there isn't one to take, then it's not a problem. But you know, there may be other conditions, like obviously staying away from the witnesses, staying away from the complainants. In the case of sex offenders, when they are released on bail, obviously the whichever person is the victim, but also it may be also that they can't go anywhere near any people under the age of 16 or whatever, any kids at all, like you know, even if it's whatever the charge was.
Right.
But yeah, witness tampering is usually dealt with by prohibiting them contacting anybody involved in the case. Because that happens. I mean, people do, you know, they phone up. I mean, everybody knows everybody here, don't they? So they phone them up and say, "Why are you saying this stuff about me?" You know, like so.
Yeah,
it's kind of
so no contact with anyone who is a witness in the case. Let's talk about the surety a little bit as well. So this is where sometimes it's almost like having someone has to put up something in order to just kind of secure, make sure that you're going to actually show up to court. So this is something that we can see here is actually in the bail law, and it speaks specifically about having a surety or multiple ones.
Multiple ones sometimes, and I've seen that in fact, I think that was the guy that was accused of stealing from Rackham's. That quite a lot of he was very, you know, he had a lot of nice friends in the community where he lived, and there were several people that were called to court when he absconded, and who lost the money that they put up for him. And I think, you know, sort of people have put like a, you know, because sureties, as I say, like the $900 bond is like the basic, like if you're required to give any money at all, that would be it. And as I say, more often than not, they can just sign for that and they don't actually have to give the money. But the sureties are where other people sign for extra money. So these usually are cases where it is somebody that doesn't necessarily, it isn't Kimanian and doesn't necessarily have ties to the community. But if they can get people to come forward and say, no, he's a good guy, I'm putting up $1,000 for him, and somebody else, I'm putting up $1,000. So you get like 10 people to put $1,000 up for you. You get a $10,000 surety. Then your chances of bail goes up.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. What's the most that you've ever seen set for bail?
Not a lot. I think maybe that one, which is probably about 20,000 in the end that he'd managed to collect. That was one of the highest I've ever seen. As I said earlier on, you know, we just don't go there with those ridiculously high situations of money because people don't have that kind of money, and you certainly don't have that kind of cash, you know. And that's why when you look at the American system, and you have that basically people are going to bail bondsmen. They're not putting up. I mean, if you get $1 million bail, you know, you got to go find, you know, like $100,000 off somebody in order to get a bondsman to put up the bail for you. And it's insane, the kind of money that gets flying around. So it's avoided here because we don't even have bail bondsmen here. Do you know what I mean? It's not even possible. So if we were to start coming up with these ridiculous sums, where would that money come from? So, you know, it isn't an issue. You're never going to get that situation where people have to put up huge sums of money. It's, as far as I'm aware, because I haven't been over there for a long time, but as far as I'm aware, it's the same situation in the UK as well. It's very rare that people get asked for large sums of money for bail.
Right. Yeah. And when people have to give up things like the passports, you know, a lot of people have multiple passports. Do you think they do an effective job of just ensuring that all passports have been surrendered?
I don't know that they do at all. I don't know. You see, that's a very good point because, people here do have a lot of passports and they're supposed to, because they generally do. I've heard judges talk about that and say all your passports, you know, but so it is. But I suppose if they don't, you know, if a perp doesn't come clean and say, well, yeah, I've got a Cuban passport, Jamaican passport, an American passport, Caymanian passport, and a British passport, you know, well, they just say, oh yeah, here's my Caymanian passport, and then they got another 4 back home. What can you do? I mean, in theory, they still shouldn't be able to get out using any of their passports, because immigration should have a stop order. There should be stop orders. I mean, how that actually works is a little opaque. How I've heard different things about who is actually responsible for informing immigration that a person is, you know, banned from, because you know how they introduced the ban. You're not allowed to go anywhere near a port. You're not allowed to. So they usually say, like, you're not allowed to go within 500 yards of a port or an airport. But if you breach that, whose responsibility is it to know that person has breached it? Who's going to know? Because the security guard at the airport doesn't know that John Brown is breaching his bail conditions and mooching around the airport and hoping to slip through on a plane, you know, with his Cuban passport that the courts don't know he has. But when he gets to immigration, at that point, that is where he should be stopped. But I think we both know that hasn't always been the case. I mean, a lot of bail absconsions are as a result of the fact that they've been allowed to travel. So the stop order and the restriction has been lifted for them to do that, but then they just don't come back. Those are the more common. I am not aware of any cases and I'm sure these cases do exist, and it'll be great as we start talking to other lawyers, and hopefully, you know, we'll get them to contact in the show. But I'm not aware of a lot of cases where people have tried to abscond on bail by going to the airport and using a different passport. But I am sure it could have happened. I mean, it certainly could have happened, and I'm sure it is likely to have happened.
Yeah.
But it's...
Yeah, Wendy, absconding.
Yeah.
I always say that word wrong. I've got Miss Silka.
Absconding. It's a nice word.
She's absconding.
Think of scones. Absconding. No.
Yeah.
It's true that people do abscond. Of course, they do a runner, but it's not as common as you might think. In actual fact, I'm actually. It surprises me how many people don't, and they do turn up and they do fight their cases and they do go through the system. And so it's not that our system is not working or anything like that. I think, you know, what our problem is that we have now in Cayman is that we're, as I said before, we don't have enough technology, like enough tags and things like that, and the technological support to enable people to be out in the community whilst they're waiting. And then the reverse side of it is that the jailhouse is packed, and so, you know, cramming people on remand into the and bearing in mind that it having a lot of people on remand in the same jail as people who are serving sentences creates all sorts of issues for the prison service. You know, they're juggling because your conditions of jail when you're on remand are very different from conditions of jail once you're convicted, because you know, once you're convicted, you get a sentencing plan, you go to work, you follow the rules, you do all these things. When you're on remand, you're effectively, you know, you're allowed to see in theory, you're allowed to see your lawyer whenever you like. You're given a lot more leeway to visit people and to prepare your case and all sorts of, you know, things like that. So it's an entirely different thing. And so having people on remand is not an ideal situation. Right.
All right. So it talks here about sureties, and it basically says you can do, you know, they consider whether or not someone is a suitable surety based on their financial resources. Now, I've seen this, and it's interesting. So someone might say, oh, yeah, my mom will act as a surety, and the court says, no, your mom's a senior lady. This is going to put an undue burden on her. So the court has quite a wide degree of discretion on who it agrees can be a surety for you as well.
Yeah. I think obviously there are certain sort of standard situations, like, you know, if mum's a homeowner, for example, then they're likely to allow it because, you know, there's an asset there that's strong. And also, at the end of the day, the courts are not after seizing people's money. The courts are after you not running away.
Yes.
For the justice system to work, we've all got to participate. So if you're charged with a crime, the best thing to do is to go and fight it. As we both know, you can fight the law and you can win.
Yeah. And the other thing that I find that is quite interesting in relation to the bit about the surety here, which is something I never really gave much thought, is that they will also consider the person's character and if they have any previous convictions.
Yes, which makes sense, right? You know, I mean, there's an element of the surety is like, it's not just the money, it's the surety is the friend, family member or whatever, that's also going to be kind of keeping an eye on the person whilst they're on bail to a certain extent, because they don't want to lose their money. And, you know, they are obviously so much more engaged then, if you like, in the process of that person following the rules and ensuring that they do what they're supposed to do. So it's like a sort of little support person as well. It's not just the person that's putting up the money that the government can take. That isn't it. It's a support person too.
Now, the cases where somebody has ran off and not showed up to court, and then you've got grandma or mom having to fork up money.
Yeah, I watched. I mean, as I say, the one that we were talking about there with the guy, the Rackham's case, where he had a number of sureties that had put up money for him. Yeah, I mean, I was in the court when all of those people were asked to pony up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you recall what sort of amount we were talking about?
Can we pause?
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. Yes.
Yes. So one case that stands out that we've mentioned a couple of times is really the Arthur Screeton case. He was the guy that was working at Rackham's, and he had $10,000 bond, and the court seized that money when he didn't come back. And that came from a number of different individuals that had put up the bail money, who were his friends. And I mean, they'd done it because they trusted him, and he was a great guy, and I'm sure they had drinks with him and all the rest of it. And then he ended up running off, and it was a CNS reader that actually found him. So there you go. We in the press have our uses sometimes, Sandra. We do. Not as useless as everybody thinks we are.
Yeah,
have something to offer.
I actually knew Arthur. This is the crazy part about this, Cayman being so small, you know. But yeah, he had been here for quite a while, according to your story here, dated back March of 2015. He'd been in Cayman for over 16 years, so I'm sure nobody thought that he was a flight risk. But let me tell you, when it comes to money and, you know, your reputation being ruined in such a small community like this,
and definitely, he was facing jail for sure.
Yeah.
So, because it was quite a bit. I mean, I think he'd stolen 10 grand as well. I mean, I think the actual money. No, much more. I think he'd stolen. Oh no, there you go, $10,850.
$850, yeah.
But you know, yeah. I mean, that's enough to go past the custody threshold. That one.
And it's interesting that his lawyer had actually applied for the bail to be returned to the person who supplied it, and the court said no.
Yeah.
And they didn't bother to bring him back.
And yes, and then even though they did learn where he was, they made a decision not to extradite him.
Interesting. When someone loses bail, where does that money go? It just goes into the pot for court fines and everything else?
Yeah, it just goes into the court fines money. Yeah.
Right. So it goes into the general pot then. For court fines and are there any? It doesn't happen often, I don't feel like, because I can't think of too many cases.
No, it doesn't. I mean, there's some brewing at the moment. There's been a case running through the courts at the moment that has still not made it to trial. It's another fraud case, and that guy he's had 2 appearances where he hasn't turned up, but it's not certain yet that he's gone for good. There is still a possibility he's been given one more chance to show up. So we'll see whether he does or not. Yeah. But I mean, in general, the bail thing, it is only fair that people get bail. I mean, I know it's easy for us all to the keyboard warriors get going about the catch and release programs, and you have that whole situation where, as you say, they want to string everybody up by their what before they've even been convicted and bang them up, throw away the key type thing. And that's a very American approach to criminality. And I think we'd all agree. I know I'm accused of being a lily-livered liberal, and it's never going to change. Yes, I am, because I just think at the end of the day, I just don't think being mean it works. People don't respond to being treated mean. They respond to being treated kindly. Now, I know some people don't respond as well as you want, but it takes a while. If somebody's grown up their entire life and being treated like a piece of dirt, they're not suddenly going to be really nice because you treat them nice one time. It takes a while. But I mean, in principle, largely, we shouldn't be mean to each other. And I think if you've made a mistake and you have or have not committed the crime, because there's the point we don't even know you're being charged with a crime, doesn't mean to say you did it. Or there may be a very, very good reason why you did it. And so banging you up before we even know those reasons, or you've been given a chance to explain yourself, is to me pretty wrong, unless you're a danger. If you're a danger to children, if you're a danger because you're violent, that's different. But just because you've done a bit of burglary, doesn't make you a danger. Most burglars, unpleasant as it might be, they're not dangerous. They want to be in and out your house, grabbing the stuff that they want, and on their way to go get whatever they, to sell whatever they've stolen to get whatever they need, because most 9 times out of 10 is because of a drug addiction or a booze addiction, whatever it is. That's all they want to do. They're not a danger to society.
Yes.
I mean, we should. I in fact think we treat thieves here more harshly than we treat violent offenders. I see violence is often just not punished in the same way that people can be punished for stealing. You can stab somebody multiple times and go to jail for less than 4 years. You steal some money from an offshore company and you'll look at Canover. I mean, Canover's never hurt a fly. Do you know what I mean? And I doubt very much he would in physically. But the last conviction,
stealing money obviously hurts people too.
Yeah, well, does it?
I mean,
not in the same way.
Well, they not him, but the whole FIFA thing. They stole from poor kids.
Yeah, the FIFA thing. But the last one that he was convicted for, he didn't even steal anything. CONCACAF didn't even report it as a theft. Still to this day, CONCACAF don't recognize that case as a theft. It was a false accounting case, whereby Canover is accused of manipulating the paperwork and everything to sort of divert money or get money from. And it was really just a dodgy deal that he had going on with some Indian guy. It wasn't. But yet he got like 8 years, and yet people who are raping and pillaging and violent, chopping people with machetes in their heads because they've had a dispute over a can of K-brew. They end up in jail for like just a couple of years. I mean, I've seen cases of violent cases where, people don't get very long sentences. So I'm saying all that to sort of point out that this idea of banging people up because they've been charged with a crime, I find wrong, to be honest. I mean, I'd let everybody out. So there you go. Unless they're violent. You know what I'm saying? Unless they're violent. Because I see that's the only reason why you treat someone. If you can't stop yourself from punching, stabbing, kicking, hurting, then you need to be locked up. But if, you're pickpocketing a little, not so great. It's not great. It's not ideal.
Oh, Wendy. We can't have you being a judge. That's for sure.
Oh God, no. And don't ever put me on a jury. Yeah, I'll do jury duty, but I'll tell you, every single lawyer is going to be saying, no, we object, no.
Yeah, because they know you have a reputation already. Yeah,
that's right.
Interesting. All right,
I just think there's other ways.
There's even been attempted murder cases where people have been granted bail.
Oh yeah, definitely.
There've been a lot of people like attempted murder. So I think the only one for sure that you wouldn't get bail for is murder. Can you think of anyone who was charged with murder and still got bail?
I don't think that's not cases that I've covered. I've never seen I mean, I think there's been the guy that was charged twice. The fingerprints in the blood that were not in the blood. If you remember Anthony Akiyumi, that case was a very good, interesting case. And I think at one point, because he was having a retrial, he got bailed. And he was charged with murder.
Okay, but that a very, very rare occurrence.
Yeah, it is much. It's much rarer because of, and that's what these are the things that feed into what's likely to get you bail. You know, when you're arguing, because if you've got to go and argue yourself, you don't have a lawyer, and you've got to go to court and argue yourself to get yourself out of bail. The things that feed into it is the severity of the crime, the likelihood of you running off, the likelihood of you doing it again, your family circumstances, what you've got to lose, and of course what the ultimate sentence might be. So those are all the things that fire in. And the problem with murder is that now we have a mandatory minimum of 30 years. So everybody who is charged with murder is looking at that type of if they get convicted, that type of a sentence. And so consequently it's tougher. It's tougher to get bail. It's not mandatory or anything, but it's rare. It's rare. I can't think of it happening anytime recently at all. As I say, the only one I can think of, only one, and it wasn't so much that he got bail in the incident case. He got it because he was tried, he appealed, he won his appeal, and then he was waiting for a retrial, and that's when he got bail.
Right.
Because obviously the appeal had weakened the case in any event against him. So, because that's another thing, like if the evidence is flimsy, you can argue that when you can go into court and say, listen, they're charging me with this murder and on merely circumstantial evidence, and I can refute it all, so there is that, because otherwise it's locking people up is wrong. It's a fundamental human right that we have, liberty and freedom. So it has to be, this idea that just because you're charged, you should get sent to jail is not the case. Yeah. And I agree.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, Wendy, about, I think there was an instance some years back. Now it's been a minute actually, where the actual devices, there was an issue with people being able to tamper with the devices. They could take them off and pretend like they were home. And, they were coming back whenever they felt like it.
The old tinfoil.
Yeah. Because, the police can't keep someone indefinitely in police lockup. So they've got 48 hours normally. And then they've got to either give them police bail. We should probably talk about what police bail is, because there are two different types of bail. So you can get police bail, and then
it's a very good point. And we've been talking all night long about court bail. Right.
So police bail is where basically, and that's normally where it's not going to be. It's the lower level offenses. It's not going to be contentious. But it also happens when they arrest you, as opposed to you being charged and actually taken to court. So the investigation is still continuing. They will give you bail until they decide to charge you. So again, just use myself as an example. All of my cases, when I was arrested by the police, I've never been like in lockup or anything like that. I think I've been in handcuffs once for one of my cases. And when I won that was the judicial review one. When I won that, the judge was like, this was ridiculous. Like the way that you guys went at her with 6 detectives and all this kind of stuff. He was like, give me a break. You were acting like this was a capital murder case. And it was meant to send a particular message to me, I suppose. But the judge saw, right through that. But yeah, you get bail on your own recognizance from the police, And then when you show up to court, the court, which is again is majority of what we've been talking about this evening, they will then put any conditions if necessary, or consider a bail application.
Right. Yeah. The police bail often occurs when the investigations are still ongoing.
Exactly.
So there's usually no conditions attached to it. You never got any conditions? Well, you never got conditions attached to anything because your crimes were just.
No, it was always like on your own recognizance type thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it is. the space, the problem here is, I think there's been a lot of coverage, like in the past there's been a considerable amount of coverage about more years ago now. The police had an awful lot of people who were still on bail in relation to cases that were still being investigated for years. And even though these suspects, it was obvious that these suspects, they had no evidence against these people, and no grounds really for them to continue keeping these people on this sort of bail, even though it didn't really mean anything. The theory was, because I think sometimes, the theory is that if you're on police bail, they can demand that you come to the police station. Because that's another condition of court bail sometimes, is that you have to go to the police station. You have to report in. Another one I forgot to mention when we were talking about, when if people are on remand and perhaps they're on a tag or whatever, or they couldn't get a tag, they'll be asked to go to the police station once every other day, once a week, depending on the circumstances and what the court decides. And I think the police can also request people to return. But then there comes a time when I've been coming to the police station every week for the last 6 years. It gets a bit ridiculous. And I think there was a period of time when there was a lot of complaints about the fact that the police were holding people on bail as parts of investigations, even though they were no longer really suspects in the case, or they may be suspects, but the police had no way of ever getting the evidence against these people to charge them. And so you end up with a situation where you're in this sort of like holding space, and I think that was addressed. I think that that got addressed, and people were released from police bail finally.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to ask the police that now when we do stories where people have been arrested, and then there's no months go by and there's no charges. Obviously, they've been released on police bail. I ask about that now and say, have they been released from the police bail? Because it's now the police, I think, are doing it more. Like they're making sure that when that happens, like that you don't have the situation where they've never been formally released.
Exactly. Right. All right. So I think we've covered quite a bit of ground this evening in relation to bail. Hopefully it has, demystified how a person gets bail. What are some of the limitations really that are already in place? The bails law is not a very large piece of legislation. As legislations go, it's actually only 13 pages. And so, we always encourage people to, have a little perusal through it. It's not going to hurt you.
Read it.
Learn something new.
You need to know if you don't have a lawyer and you get charged by the police and you can't get a duty solicitor because it isn't the kind of crime, or there's no, for whatever other reasons, you need to know that you have, as you said, the most important thing is that you have a right to bail. Yeah. There is a presumption you have a right to it.
Right. And let's talk about cases where there is no presumption, because there is a list here of them under section, it's part 3, right, of accused persons and bail. So 17 subsection 2 says a person accused or convicted of any of the following offenses is not entitled to bail. And this is a list. It's not a very long list, because as you can imagine, there are lots of offenses out there. So murder, manslaughter, rape, or any other offense of a sexual nature against a person punishable by imprisonment for 4 years or more. Arson, wounding or grievous bodily harm, wounding or inflicting grievous bodily harm, burglary, robbery, extortion, kidnapping, abduction, wrongful confinement, a bomb hoax.
There's still a presumption though, even though you're not entitled to it.
They're not right. So there would have to be a good argument put forward by the defense.
Absolutely, because there is a general right to bail, as the law says.
Yes.
So even though there are carved out offences whereby they can say, well, we're going to ask, you're not going to get bail. Yeah. And you have, like you say, but there are still exceptional circumstances, and you can still argue it.
And firearms offenses and so forth, but still, again,
many people get bail on many of these offences. Many of them.
Talks about the general right to bail is there. And then, again, it just really comes down to the attorneys. Sometimes you will find that a defense attorney will obviously have already spoken to their client and talked about, what are some of the things that we can put forward to the court to ensure that you get bail. And there will be times when the prosecution won't necessarily object. And then in other cases, they will offer up a very strong objection, especially if they believe there could be any potential witness tampering.
Yeah, witness tampering is a bad one. Also, if you've ran off at any time, if you were wanted by the police and they had to track you down, do you know what I mean? If they put out an APB for you and then you didn't turn up, and and they had to run you down, then that's going to make your presumption of bail like pretty
because they automatically think you're a flight risk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So again. So you're going to have a hard time probably getting bail in those circumstances. Yeah. Anything else you think might be worth mentioning in terms of bail?
No, I think the message that we need to get out to people is that this, yes, of course, those lists of offences as an exception, but in general, despite the fact that you might not have an entitlement to bail, you still have a presumption of it, and you still have a general right to argue for bail. So you can go in the court and argue, no matter what you've done, you can argue for bail. Because you're an innocent person, right? I'm not being proven guilty yet of anything. I've been charged, but I'm not, and I'm not a danger to society, or you show all of these things, then you should be able to get bail. And there shouldn't be, people shouldn't be kind of, chomping at the bit to have everybody locked up as soon as they're charged. Like, we've got to move away from that. It's like those expectations need to change. People are going to be bailed the way it is.
And I think there's two things that we should probably mention at this point as well, is you can continue to apply for bail. So even if you've been denied bail at a previous hearing, you're sitting in jail, your next hearing, your lawyer can come back and ask for it again. I don't think there's any limitation on how many times you can actually do
every single time the circumstances change, your lawyer can come and do it again.
Yep. And then there can also be a variation of the bail conditions.
Yep.
You can have it adjusted or appealed if circumstances once again change.
Yeah, if it's tied to your job hours and your job hours change and come to it, or as we've seen many times, your passport's with the court, but you need to go overseas for some reason, you can come and make an application and then get your passport back and be allowed to travel depending on the circumstances of your crime. And it's not, you can't stop people. If somebody gets sick and they need to go away to a hospital if they can't get treated here
or whatever.
Yeah, it's against your human rights to be denied medical attention.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, just because you're charged
doesn't mean
you say you did it.
Yeah. All right. Great. I think we covered some really, really good ground here. Hopefully, folks, that helps to demystify bail and bail conditions and kind of how that works. Wendy, thank you so much for another amazing segment of Court Matters. So if you have a question, you're listening to this and you go, wow, Sandy and Wendy, I've got a question. Send your questions to us. You can send it to info@cmrtv.com. Again, that's info@cmrtv.com. We'll get it. And maybe we'll do like a whole Q&A segment where we just kind of go through your questions right here on Court Matters. So until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Wendy, have a good one.
See you later. Bye.